Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today again. We have a new press conference, the third one in a row, I would say, in the past month, where we are presenting to the European citizens and to the world what is going on in the European Parliament in regards to the violation of basic human rights all across Europe. The title of this press conference is Fighting for Freedom, Defending People's Rights Against Mandatory Digital Certificate. You've seen in the previous conferences we have colleagues from different groups that join us. Some of them are home today because they are able to vote again from home. But we have along with us a new colleague from the Greens group on my left and to my right, two previous colleagues that you already know from Croatia. So before further ado, I would like to introduce my new colleague, Stasys Jakeliūnas from Lithuania. He's part of the Greens, and after plenty of research, he has a lot of information that he would like to share with us.
Thank you, Christian, and hello, everyone. I've been researching what I call COVID puzzle since May of last year, 2020. There are a number of aspects, origin of COVID virus related to that dangerous experiments on pathogens called gain-of-function experiments and other areas. But one specific area which I would think I'm more qualified than in other areas is statistics data. We all know how important is reliable and comparable across member states data to make policy decisions, especially such a difficult and complex policy decisions with restriction of freedoms, of movements, etc., etc. So, three institutions responsible for statistical information in the European Union, and a member of ECON, which is responsible for the parliamentary scrutiny of statistical systems. That's Eurostat, the Statistical Governance Advisory Body, and also ECDC, European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. I talked as a member of ECON to all of them. All of them, three of them, confirmed that the only reliable and comparable data related to COVID is excess mortality. Now, based on the database of Euromomo, which is a Danish data system, excess mortality is normal since the end of this year, end of February, sorry. So there is no, based on this data, no pandemic anymore. There are fluctuations, there are notification rates, but case notification rates are not exact data, is not relevant enough for these decisions. So especially for children, there is no mortality, excess mortality, never during this pandemic. So when the decisions are made to introduce COVID passes in Lithuania next month, the COVID pass will be introduced mandatory for 12-year-olds. There is no ground for that at all. So I'm worried that data is manipulated. I have a degree in business. I worked in insurance, with actuaries, with mathematicians. I have a degree in psychology too, which works with how people think, how they make decisions. So the manipulation of data, witting or unwitting manipulation data, is a very, very strong case here during the COVID. So I urge the European Parliament, European Commission and Member States to look at the recent recommendation of ECDC, European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, dated 18th of October, which is called COVID-19 surveillance guidance, transition from COVID-19 emergency surveillance to routine surveillance of respiratory pathogens. For me, the most important part is in page number 4, where they recommend to define case of COVID-19 as follows: clinical criteria, acute respiratory infection or influenza-like illness. I think that's for doctors to diagnose this illness. Second criteria, laboratory criteria, detection of SARS-CoV-2 nucleic acid in a clinical specimen. That's a PCR test and some other tests. And the most important part, confirmed COVID case, any person meeting clinical criteria and the word "and" is in capital letters, laboratory criteria. So we have to use this recent recommendation in our decisions, in our strategies for COVID certificates and for other decisions in order to understand that we don't have such an acute pandemic as we had a year ago or so. Thank you very much. I think we'll research further and share with you more information.
For freedom and liberties, you know, Ivan Sinčić and Mislav Kolakušić. Mr. Kolakušić is a former judge. He did a lot of research on the legislation, I would say, behind everything that is happening. But now my colleague Ivan has plenty of things to share with us, especially what is happening in Croatia. Ivan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Terhes. Hello to everybody. As said previously, this is our third press conference. I would like to start with what happened in Croatia. A few weeks ago, digital COVID certificates were made mandatory in Croatian public sector. This caused almost instant opposition, and people were organizing more and more. And on the 20th of November, which is last Saturday, we had a historic rally on the central square of our capital, Zagreb. It was indeed the largest gathering of political nature in modern Croatian history. A clear message was sent to Croatian government, which is led by very bad policies and very bad science. The people were there to say no to digital green certificate, or COVID potvrda, as we say in Croatian. They were there to say no to discrimination and segregation, no to media censorship, and no to oppression of different scientific and medical opinion. And they were, of course, there to say yes to good science and preservation of fundamental human rights and constitutional rights. Croatian government, I will give you an example why are people so furious. The Croatian government still claims that the unvaccinated people spread virus 20 times more than vaccinated, which is scientifically untrue. Research shows it is almost the same. The difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated is insignificant. The recent research published in the Lancet magazine confirms that. And many governments have started to re-examine, to re-evaluate their policies based on this scientific research, but the Croatian government has not. They still have the same narrative, which is illogical, unscientific, and with that, digital green certificate remains a license to spread and infect. Protests are, of course, very good. They're very beautiful. This is a festival of democracy. They show what is the popular opinion, but in the long term, in order to make things right, they may not be enough. We have to make, all around Europe, groups and movements. Peoples of Europe need to organize more and more and go to the next level. From individuals, there must be organized groups, specialized groups like doctors and lawyers, politicians, journalists, etc. And from these groups, movements must be made. And then finally, a movement on a European level should be made. We have to make this political. Politicians, many of them, do not fear protests. We have seen protesting from Italy and France to Croatia to many other countries, but many politicians are not convinced yet to change their illogical policies. This is why we have to hit them where it hurts. We have to make this political. DGC must be made political, and we want to emphasize that so that citizens all around Europe understand it. DGC started in this building, or in Brussels building, and also this is where it has to be stopped. So I call upon all the citizens to stand together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. The Article 1 of Treaty of the European Union states the following. This treaty marks a new stage in the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe, in which decisions are taken as openly as possible and as closely as possible to the citizens. In the previous press conference, we showed to the world how the contracts signed between the European Union, and in particular by Ursula von der Leyen, with these vaccination companies, were released to the public and to us as members of the European Parliament. 20, 30, 40% of these contracts are blacked out right now. Nobody in Europe, and even us, as elected by the people for the people, do not know what these contracts exactly contain. What are the clauses in these contracts? What provisions were agreed by the Commission and on behalf of the states by the Commission? So what we've seen happening with this pandemic clearly violates Article 1 of Treaty of the European Union. This is what makes the difference between a tyranny and democracy. When you know everything about what your government does, that's democracy. When the government knows everything about you, that is tyranny. Now, when these contracts that are worth billions and billions of euros, we don't even know the exact figures, are not fully disclosed to us, to you as journalists, and to the European citizens, that's a problem. The second issue, as the article says, that all these decisions should be taken as closely as possible to the citizens. Now, this provision was also violated in this case. In the month of April 2021, Reinders Didier, the Commissioner on Justice, came in the plenary of the Parliament, and he said, and I quote, "The proposal put forward by the Commission is firmly built on two core values, non-discrimination and data protection. Clearly, the regulation imposing the green certificate is mentioning 15 times the word non-discrimination. That's what the text says. That's what we were told in the plenary. None of us voted for it, for many reasons, but the majority of the members of the Parliament believed, trusted what this commissioner said in April. And look where we are right now. In the month of November 2021, people cannot go to work in Europe if they don't have a green certificate, and in some countries, if they are not vaccinated, even against their will, people cannot enter stores if they don't have a green certificate. People cannot travel, not between countries, but even using the local transportation, if they don't have a green certificate. In our case, we were not allowed to enter the European Parliament if we don't have a green certificate. Now, we are holding our ground. In my case, I'm not obeying the decision of the President of the Parliament, who is conditioning to exercise my mandate received from the people by anything else than proof that I'm a member elected of this Parliament, and that's it. This is what the Treaty of the European Union says. The problem is, if they are trying to blackmail us as elected by the people for the people, now what is happening with the other citizens of Europe? We heard their voices. We received thousands and thousands of emails. And I have to tell you guys, I try to reply to and we try to reply to as many as possible. It's impossible. That's how many people are crying out loud for someone in these households, for someone in the Commission, to listen to them. This is not the Europe that they want to live in, where their life is conditioned by a certificate that is not certifying anything. Because someone who's vaccinated can get infected and can spread the infection, and someone who's tested can be infected after the person leaves. the place of testing. So what kind of Europe do we want? A kind of Europe where the rights and liberties of every European citizen is respected, or a tyrannical Europe, as the USSR was before, where people do not have or are not acknowledged to have basic fundamental rights, but all these rights are seen by an unelected bureaucracy as privileges granted by the government. And I want to read something mentioned in this regulation that it's imposing the green certificate in Europe. In paragraph 62 of this regulation, it's stated, and I quote, "This regulation respects the fundamental rights and observes the principles recognized in particular by the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union." Later on, it said in the same paragraph, and I quote, "Member states are to comply with the Charter when implementing this regulation." The question is the Commission and the Member States complying with what was mentioned here? Because I looked in the Charter, and I quote from Article 3 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which states the following: "Rights to the integrity of a person. Everyone has the right to respect for his or her physical or mental integrity." Paragraph 2 of Article 3 says, "In the fields of medicine and biology, the following must be respected in particular: the free and informed consent of the person concerned." Now, is this happening right now in Europe or not? Because what we've seen happening in Austria, for example, people will not be able to exercise basic fundamental rights unless they are vaccinated against their will. This is what is happening in more and more countries. So from what we were told by Commissioner Reinders Didier in the plenary of the Parliament, and many of our colleagues believed it, that it was for the good of the people. Look where we are right now. They are not acknowledging the side effects, as my colleague said. They are not acknowledging the basic fundamental rights of the people. And we live right now, slowly but surely. We are transitioning, we are witnessing the transition of the European Union from a democracy to tyranny. Many of us, actually all of us, he's from Lithuania, he was under USSR. They are from former Yugoslavia. I'm from Romania, a former communist country. We all lived in tyranny. We know what that is. That's the reason why we are speaking up. Because we don't want the citizens of Europe to live the kind of tyranny that unfortunately we all had to go through. As I said, this regulation is mentioning 15 times that this regulation should not be used to discriminate, and it should not be used to obligate anybody to get vaccinated. Well, I just want to show you 3 pictures on how this regulation is applied right now in Romania. Kaufland, it's one of the bigger stores in Europe. Look what they've done in Romania. They divided their stores for vaccinated and for unvaccinated people. If you are vaccinated, you are allowed to enter this gate. If you are not vaccinated, you enter the other gate. There are walls in these stores that are separating the shoppers from vaccinated to unvaccinated. Guys, is this the type of Europe, the kind of Europe that we want to be living in? I don't believe so. So we are here today, as we mentioned before, to fight for liberty, to fight for democracy, and restore fundamental rights in the European Union. Thank you. Now, for those in the media that are here, if you guys have any questions, sure, if you can mention your name and media outlet, please.
Thank you. My name is Anna van Densky. I'm from the Europe Diplomatic Magazine. I have 2 questions for you and for Mr. Jakeliūnas. Jakeliūnas. Our first question to you, because while you named your conference, it's people's rights. You talk about human rights, but you called it people's rights, because what you said is very close to what is mentioned in the resolution 2361. It's easier, of the Council of Europe, because the resolution is clearly stating that there shouldn't be any forced vaccination and any discrimination. So why it's people's rights but not human rights? Because you put accent on people of Europe. And the question to you is about the surveillance, because there is a lot of concern now, because you lived in the Soviet Union, and of course then there were no similar tools which are now available. And there is a great concern among human rights defenders that the system which is created presumably for healthcare is a giant surveillance mechanism that will be used later, like Chinese system. And that's why there is a concern that basically Europe, dealing with the COVID pandemic, took the Chinese tool of surveillance, which is contrary to fundamental rights and principles of the European Union. Some music was nice. So basically, how it's possible to citizens to defeat this system, because that's the greatest fear, to avoid that it's used, like in China, to survey citizens.
Thank you so much for your questions. I will answer the question that was addressed to me. Why, in the title of the press conference, it was mentioned defending people's rights and not human rights. And I'm telling you why. Because right now what we see happening across Europe, if we just speak in general about human rights, not many of these bureaucrats understand what is going on. Human rights, it's a generic term, which we all agree with. But in this case, we are dealing with the rights of the people who have fundamental rights and human rights to do all these things. Who are hurt at the end are not just some abstract rights, which we all agree that they have to be respected. It's actual people. People are concerned that they cannot have a job anymore. People are concerned that they will not be able to pay their mortgages because they will be losing their jobs. People are concerned that they cannot bring their kids to school if they are not vaccinated. So this is the reason why the discussion right now all across Europe, it should be about people. Are all these measures helping the people or not? I mean, clearly what we've seen happening so far is not helping them, on top of violating their basic human and fundamental rights. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the good question. Of course, it's a very pertinent question to whole the world, not only us. But the recent decision here at the Parliament, President Sassoli on Friday decided to move back to the hybrid form of work, back from the physical. When the physical attendance and regular norms were introduced again, a while ago, the COVID certificate was introduced to enter the Parliament. So when the physical attendance was again changed to the hybrid form of work, he forgot, and someone else forgot, to remove the certificate requirement to enter the Parliament. So that's just the small indication of how sticky is the surveillance and data control, which even in the Parliament, probably potentially the most democratic institution in the world, I would claim. So we're fighting for that. But in general, I think people have to be aware, but we politicians have to represent the people, all the people in Europe, and fight for their rights to maintain their data. Facebook and others collect massive amounts of data. So that's the regulation, that's the awareness that we have to introduce. But first of all, we have to understand how the system works. So the European Parliament has to remove the requirement for the COVID certificate to enter the Parliament, because we're back to the hybrid form of work. Why stick with the COVID certificate as we didn't have before? So that's an example, I think, indicative of how sticky the control, the surveillance, the want, the need for data collection from people is around us. Thank you.
Because there is a concern that should be addressed about working confidentially. It's crucial for you as politicians that you can also work confidentially for us, for journalists, for diplomats, and many other professions. And of course, it's clear that when you work in the pizza shop, you are not so concerned as a director of a bank, for example, because confidentiality is crucial for businesses as well when you're on a certain level. So what you should, how you can address this problem, what you can say to all these people who suffer now because they are already in this surveillance mode, because wherever they go, they have to show their COVID certificate, but nobody knows how later it will be used. So what you can say to these people?
The example of recent weekend across Europe is an example. If the politicians don't do their proper job, if institutions, European institutions fail, people will go to the streets, and they are going to the streets already. So they have to fight for their rights. But I think it's dangerous because the extremists can exploit that. So the institutions, the politicians have to represent and ensure that there is no data abuse. The data should be used as minimum as possible. The data should be deleted whenever it's collected and used for whatever purposes. So I don't know how my COVID certificate data is processed. I cannot see that. So I don't want that to be, again, in the Parliament and across Europe. As I tried to indicate in my brief presentation, the pandemic basically is over. So all these restrictions, including the national or international or European certificates, are not needed anymore. Of course, we have to take care of our hygiene. Of course, I'm not saying there is no COVID, but there is no need. There is no data that shows that these certificates are needed anymore. So we have to stop that right now.
I want to add something to your question, just a second. Clearly, we are witnessing right now the Chinification of Europe, because we see what is happening in China right now with the social credit score, where the government is monitoring and surveilling all the people from the beginning to end. Everything that they do, everything, everywhere where they walk, they control everything and they watch everything. This is the example of a tyranny. When the government knows everything about you, where you go, what you eat, where you enter, that's the tyrannical system. And we've seen this system being implemented right now under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, slowly but surely in the European Union. The green certificate was just the first step. There are a few more proposals right now under debate in the Parliament. The European Wallet ID, for example, the European Social Security Card. All these things that are creating a system that will monitor, control, supervise, and condition the rights of all the European citizens. Just yesterday, before yesterday actually, on Monday, in the plenary, we had the Commissioner for Work. And he said, well, we need the European Social Security card number, pass, as he called it, certificate, to facilitate the freedom of movement. You know, we heard this before with the green certificate. So they use, this is the same narrative. And I invite you guys as journalists, just watch what they say and what they do. Because there's a 180-degree difference from what they say and what they promise and what they are committing to in front of the plenary and what the end result is. When the green certificate was implemented, again, the commissioner said on record that this is to facilitate the freedom of movement, and that's it. Even in the case that someone does not have this green certificate, the regulation allows you to freely travel from one country to another. The problem is when you arrive in a certain country, you will have to follow certain medical restrictions, like quarantine and others. So from what we was told back then in April and May, look where we are right now. So I'm glad that you asked this question, and I invite all the journalists from Europe and from the world to see what is happening here, because we should not allow this. We should not forget that the European Union was created in a total opposition of the Soviet Union. Even in the article, in the first article of the Treaty of the European Union, it says, EU, it's an area of freedom, not of control, not of condition, or not of mass surveillance, an area of freedom. And it's our duty and our call to fight for this. Thank you.
If I may add on that.
Yes.
There is a standard in law. Nobody is guilty until proven guilty. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty. And we also had a similar standard in the health system. Nobody is sick until diagnosed to be sick. But what we experience now is it's vice versa. Everybody is a threat until proven to be safe and healthy. And this is simply complete madness. This is unacceptable. And on the surveillance system, let me give you a hint. I have good connections with India. In India, for months now, there are almost 0 cases, extremely low number of cases. But nonetheless, India is a federal state. Some federal entities and the federal government has the intention or is already implementing a COVID certificate. They have a different name for that. So in Europe, they say, yeah, we have a huge number of cases, so we need DGC to facilitate. But in India, they don't have for months now, but they still have plans to introduce COVID certificate. Why? There is no justification for that. So there must be a different global position on this. Chinification, that's a good term, yeah. Why? Also in India, they are starting to condition people. There are some free food programs, social programs. You cannot get your free food or help unless you are vaccinated or you have a DGC or similar. Why? When there are almost 0 cases for months now. Now they are making like a fear campaign. Yeah, we don't have problem now, but we should do this and this and that in order to prevent the 3rd wave from coming to India. We are now in, they say, 4th wave. In India, they have finished the 2nd, and now they are like preparing for the 3rd. But there is much more to this DGC than just COVID crisis.
Thank you.
Khalid Hamid Faruqi from Geo Television News and Young Group of Newspaper. I'm based in Brussels. Don't you think it is very complicated? If you talk about data collection, for quarter century, European Union is a surveillance society. I crossed border 25 years ago. They have my data. They have everything in German database. But this is very particular situation. I mean, we are not really, no opposition come to vast level of data collection. You will find everyone in this in European Union within a 10 minutes if you break the law. So, and this is very particular situation, the pandemic, like vast majority of people in Europe really scared with non-vaccinated people. So democracy is operating within the ambit of majoritarianism, and this is the vast majority, and very tiny minority don't want to be vaccinated, and medical experts are saying that they are the threat. So why we should put really vast majority or vast number of people in European Union under threat because some people don't want to be vaccinated? Which right you want to exercise here? When non-vaccinated people, very tiny minority is threat. Look the numbers. I mean, they have the point. Now, I live in Belgium, 25,000 people died in Belgium due to COVID, and now numbers are receded to non-existential. So yes, these are the fact, and we are not talking, I'm not talking opinion, I'm giving you fact.
I'll give you facts again. And thank you for raising that question, because I'm sure there are many other people all across Europe that are asking the same question. First of all, we don't live in a democracy. We live in what is called a constitutional democracy. So there are certain fundamental rights that are individual, that are personal. No one can vote, for example, to chop one of your hands off. Why not? If you're right-handed or left-handed and you have a higher risk of stabbing someone, let's chop everybody's hand to make sure that everybody's safe. Is this the kind of society we want? That is the reason why there are certain fundamental rights that are individual and personal. And one of such rights is the integrity of the body. No one outside of you can ever vote for you to inject something, to eat something, to do something with your body. It should be solely your will and your wish what to do with your body. It's simple as that. If we don't understand this basic principle, We don't understand how the Western world was developed. Because this is what is happening right now in China, for example, where prisoners, for example, body parts and organs are taken away from them to be given to the communist bureaucrats. Is that the kind of Europe that we want? I don't believe so. Now you mentioned that some people or some so-called experts are claiming that the non-vaccinated people are a threat to the vaccinated one. Well, let me ask you something back. Well, if they are vaccinated, and these vaccines are working so well, why are they feel threatened by someone who's not vaccinated? Because that's the reason why you're vaccinated. That's the reason why you're taking a medical product, for you to be protected. Not to blame the fact that these medical products are not working as they were marketed on those that are not taking such products. Third, you were mentioning something about the data collection. That is true. When you pass the border, when you do certain things, the governments are collecting such data. Yeah, that's a legitimate discussion. If we should look, if there's too much data collected about us who are traveling from one country to another, and I agree with it. The problem is now that all across Europe, we shifted the burden of proof. In any democracy, you have law enforcement agencies. Agencies that are enforcing the law in case you break it. You have police, you have prosecutors, you have all these agencies. The problem now in Europe is that we have what is called compliance with the law officers. Do you know who these people are? When you try to enter the restaurant, you have to show your green certificate to a person that might not have a green certificate, to a person that doesn't have any medical background, to a person that doesn't know anything. The person is a waitress over there. So now you have to show to another person, another individual, another citizen, that's exactly as you are, that you are complying with the law. So they transform the whole society upside down. When you see a law enforcement officer, you know that maybe you're in trouble or you've done something. That's okay. If you broke the law, you have to suffer persecution or punishment. But if you're a free citizen, to go at every corner and show to another citizen that you are complying with the law, this is absolutely insane. If you read the vision of the founding fathers of the European Union, none of them, even in their worst nightmares, never ever believed or dreamed that something like this will happen in the European Union.
Sir, you actually asked about the numbers, 25,000 deaths or so in Belgium and other countries. I don't believe these numbers. That's the problem. If you define the case of COVID and then resulting death as someone having a positive PCR test, that's not enough. The 18th of October ECDC guidance on how to define the case should be the basis for that. The doctor has to diagnose that you are sick, and if you have a positive test, and the PCR methodology is highly questionable in itself. So the numbers that I look for, and the three institutions responsible for statistics, including COVID statistics in the European Union, said that excess mortality is the only reliable and comparable, that means harmonized across the European Union, statistic related to COVID. That's where we have to look at. And when I dig down in the age groups, I don't see any excess mortality up to age of 45 or 50, none at all. So the elderly people, the sick people with other illnesses are the risk groups. We should help them, we should protect them, and potentially we should vaccinate them. Because the vaccines, what they are, some of them experimental, you know that. Some of them continue to be trial process up to 2023. So they could be a risk in itself. But I'm not a medical person. I'm a numbers person. And the numbers don't tell the story that the decisions are based on. The notification rates and ECDC data was quoted by President Sassoli on Friday when making this decision, again, to restrict working conditions to hybrid form of action. That's not good enough. So we should all look at the scientists, other scientists, and there are a number of them. Some of them are discredited around the world, so we have to debate that, but the numbers don't show that we have a pandemic as severe as we had before. So therefore, all the restrictions should be removed, maybe gradually, but not to increase as Austria, Lithuania, and some other countries are doing. This is not based on numbers, and that's a major issue.
Sorry, democracy indeed is the rule of the majority, but with the full respect to the rights of the minority. That's why we have the constitutions, of course, and all the rights we spoke of. Also, I'm not really sure that a small minority wants to get vaccinated, wants to remain unvaccinated. In Belgium, I suppose so, but in Croatia, Eastern Europe, we came to like 45% with 1 dose, and less than that with 2 doses in Croatia. Everything else is basically because people are coerced, people are blackmailed, people are forced to take the vaccine. So in Croatia, the majority, their free will, the majority is decided to go to this crisis without the vaccines, with other measures. I think that's the situation in Bulgaria, Romania, yes, perhaps even some Western European countries. We should not coerce a certain medical product on anyone. There are different approaches to this crisis all around the world. But unfortunately, in Europe, we have these like commission-based policies, and all the governments are simply repeating it. And what we want is a democratic debate on everything. On everything.
Right. Thank you. Any more questions? Online? Are there any journalists? No? Thank you so much, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
we'll continue.